Well, we're going to, a little bit about myself. I'm an entomologist. So you know what an entomologist is? What's an entomologist? Bugs, that's right. And I studied especially insects that attacked woody plants, trees and shrubs. So that's really my specialty. I was a park officer for a couple years. I've taught at the university level. I now work for the Care of Trees as Vice President of Field Education and Research. So I do a lot of talks, do a lot of education, write a lot of stuff about trees, give a lot of talks. I was down at the Arboretum last Saturday giving a presentation on soils and soil biology. So I'm here to help you answer your questions. I know a lot of times it's hard to get good information. I'll give you the straight questions. I'm not just here to sell a service. It's the whole point. You need to have good information so you can make good decisions regarding your landscapes. And so that's what I'm here to do. And really what we're going to talk about today, this evening, is really some things that you can do to help make your landscapes a little bit less problematic. And a lot of it you'll see comes down to planning and thinking ahead. And a lot of people go out and buy plants and they throw them in there and think they'll take care of themselves. But there's a lot of things that we can do to help our plants help themselves. And that's really what we're going to be talking a little bit about tonight, and why this is a much better approach than just relying on pesticides, which is something we don't want to do. So we all know how important green plants are to our landscapes, right? You can look at a landscape and you can think the trees, the shrubs, the grass, it all comes down to making our landscapes. And we realize that these trees and plants are very valuable to us because they raise our property values. But back in the old days, right after World War II, when we thought we had it all figured out, we weren't going to need entomologists anymore, and we weren't going to need plant pathologists because we had these wonderful things called chemicals. And they were new to us, and especially the synthetic chemicals, and we thought that if we mixed up a cocktail of an insecticide, a miticide, a fungicide, and sprayed everything 5 times a season, we wouldn't have any problem with insects or diseases. Well, of course, we found that wasn't quite accurate, and we learned that these chemicals were showing up in places we didn't want them. We found out that they were causing other problems besides, who wants to see people running around like this all over our yards and everything else? You know, we don't need stuff like that. So what kind of came out of this, once again, moving into something a little bit too quickly, finding out that there were some bad things, finding out these chemicals were getting places we didn't want, we figured that there's got to be a better way. And that's where this concept of integrated pest management came. And that's this idea of using a variety of different techniques to manage insects and diseases as opposed to just using chemicals. And that gravitated in because IPM, Integrated Pest Management, really got started in agronomy, where the focus was on the pest, where with urban plants, we'd really want the focus to be on the plant, on the trees and shrubs. We're not dealing with annual plants like corn, soybeans, wheat, tobacco. We're dealing with trees and shrubs and turf, long-lived plants. So it would just be thinking in a similar manner about our own health care and thinking about the only thing we do is manage insects and diseases or manage pests or diseases by using drugs. And how far do you think that would go? Now, there's a whole market out there that says marketing drugs, but we all know that it's more than that. It's living a healthy lifestyle. It's taking care of ourselves, eating right, getting lots of sleep, exercise, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where, for us in the urban environment, plant health care is the same concept. If we make our plants and do things that they will be healthier, we will have fewer problems, not eliminate problems, but fewer problems with insects and diseases on our landscape. Does that make sense for everybody? Sure it does. Makes sense for us, makes sense for plants. Except we're taught that ourselves in health class, but we're not taught about trees and shrubs and landscapes and plants and how to take care of them. So by utilizing many different strategies together, and these are the tactics to control and manage pests and diseases, things like resistant cultivars, things like mixing up species in our landscapes, Proper pruning, soil management, making the soil better, which is a huge focus for me now in our company. You know, it's not just about throwing fertilizer at plants. It's about making the soil healthier as a living organism. Managing water properly, we saw that last year in the drought. Destroying insects and pests by hand, where that's possible. You know, of course, I don't want to touch those creepy crawly things. Managing, letting nature help us. And everybody squawks about the little lady beetles that are crawling in our houses, but yet our aphid problems have really kind of gone away in the past 5-6 years because of that. So, you know, everything in nature has positives and negatives. And that doesn't mean that we aren't going to not use chemicals. Some people make that decision that for ethical reasons I'm not going to use them, and that's fine. But in a lot of cases, that may not be the best option. It's how we use these materials and use them safely, properly, only when needed that really comes down to making a difference. Now, you have a variety of individuals maybe that work with yourself. Sometimes there may be a lot of different people that do several different jobs, but we have a variety of green professionals that oftentimes interact with us. And depending on if you're buying a house or building a house or designing a house or adding to, you may have some of these different people. If you were looking at buying a new home in a new subdivision, there was a landscape developer that developed that property, bought the land, prepared it, put the roads in. That has an impact on the physical characteristics of your property, whether you realize it or not. The architect that designs the layout, the builder that builds your home, and everything that goes around with the construction practices around it, the landscape architect that designs your green landscape, the contractor that can install it or care for it, the turf contractor that takes care of your turf, irrigation contractor that may install the irrigation system if you have one, and then there's the arborist that may take care of your trees and shrubs. And all these people are working on your properties. They all have your best interests at heart, but sometimes we all do kind of a lousy job of working with each other. So those are some things to consider. And when we care for plant materials, people do not understand the importance of designing that landscape properly. You know, we were talking to the young lady here about she was thinking about some apple trees or some fruit trees, not necessarily apples, but what are some of the issues that come along with that? Not every plant works in every different situation, and there are things to consider and to do a little bit of homework before you get started, because in designing your landscape, you can solve a lot of problems before they even get started. How is the soil prepared? How is the site prepared that you're going to put these plants in? Or do you just throw them in the ground and think they'll take care of themselves? How about the actual plants that you purchase? What is the quality of those plants that you purchase? Is a bargain plants? Oftentimes can have there's a reason they're a bargain. How are they installed? How do you install them? And then how do you care for them once they are installed? And what we find as an arborist, because we're up here at this level, our company doesn't do a lot of this stuff, all right? That's done by somebody else. And so what we are ending with is up here, and what we find is our options for setting up a kind of a good landscape that's designed from the start to have few problems is done down here. And the farther we go up this ladder, and the fewer options that we have, until up here, we're kind of stuck. We're stuck with what we have. If the design is bad, wrong plant, wrong place, wrong species, can't fix that anymore. All we can do is try and deal with it. If the soil is terrible, it's high clay, it's compacted, it's not aerated, the water system is set up bad, tough to fix that. If the specimens were poured in and they were full of bugs or they have poor structure, it's hard to fix that now. If they were installed improperly, they're too deep, the planting holes weren't too big, they weren't pruned properly, here's the poor arborist up here, and you folks expecting us to fix it all. It's like going to the doctor with your cholesterol up at 300, your blood pressure at 180 over 140, and terribly overweight, and just saying to the doctor, fix me, give me a pill. And we know that's not necessarily going to work. So what we're going to do is take a look at some of these things and say, how can we help ourselves? How can we help ourselves, help our plants to reduce the problems that we have with our landscape? And this can be applied to turf, they can be applied to anything that we go on. It's kind of a heavier set on woody plants because that's what I deal with. So how about factors? What tree do I plant? A lot of people look at what their neighbors have and they say, well, I'll plant the same thing. Why do you think that's not necessarily a good idea? To have all your plants of one type. Boring. Great. There's such a diversity out there. There's, pardon me? Different shades and things, different textures, different structures. Well, there's some biological reasons too. What happened to the elm trees when we had our elm trees? The streets were all lined with elms. A disease came in, takes them all. All right. Here's a site where this was taken about in 1989, and there were 440 ash trees, all identical. And I would talk about this, that our species makeup, we should diversify our plantings. Why have 440 ash trees all identical? Never in my mind ever dreaming that there would be a pest that would come along that would threaten ash in North America, and we've got one right now, and it's not too far away. The emerald ash borer, is a threat to every ash tree in North America. And Michigan has already lost 15 million trees. Looks like the genie's out of the bottle. So over probably, the future, ash in North America is doomed. And it's going to take a while for this to happen, but it's a bad thing. And a lot of ash makes up 20% roughly of the Chicagoland trees, so we could be looking at losing 1 out of 5 trees in the Chicagoland area to this particular insect. And that's possible. So bad deal. Diversifying the landscapes, I recommend no more than 10% of your trees in any single genus. No more than 10% oaks, no more than 10% maples, no more than 10% birch, and actually no more than 5% of any single species, such as red oak or sugar maple. These are great trees, but mixing up your landscape is a good idea because you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if you've got a lot of plants, look for something else. Look and see what your neighbor has, plant something different. And there's a lot of great plants out there, but sometimes you have to look around because the garden centers are full of the same things over and over again for a lot of different reasons. But mix up your plantings, it's a good idea. So if something does come along, you've got a little bit more diversity so that your landscape may not be impacted to the extent it could be. You name a tree, you name a plant, you name a shrub, I can tell you good things about it, I can tell you bad things about it. But no species is bad in and of itself. There isn't anything that's just bad. They're only trees trying to survive. Some, however, come with lots of baggage. Does any of you know enough about trees to maybe recognize this one? Spring bloomer, blooms before the leaves come on. Callery pear, or Bradford Callery pear. Beautiful tree, nice white flowers, lustery green foliage, nice orange-red fall color, nice form. A lot of stuff going for you. What else could you ask for? But they have this nasty characteristic. And that Bradford Callery pear forms weak branch structures, and in winds and snow, they'll fall apart. They'll break apart. And when that happens, they call us up and say, well, just put it back together again, as if you can just wire it back together. And trees aren't like people that they don't fit. This is an inherent characteristic of this particular tree. There are other Callery pears, better selections, that don't have this characteristic. This doesn't mean that Callery pear is an evil plant or Bradford pear is an evil plant. It just means that this plant has these problems. They can be fixed or they can be worked with when the tree is young, but most people don't do that. So we only find out about the bad characteristics when the tree falls apart, but that doesn't mean that the tree is bad. And you could plant one of these if you want to invest the time to take care of it, but that time is going to mean more money. You have to spend more to take care of it. All right? So we make our choices. We make our choices with how we pick things. How do we decide what tree to plant? How much space is available above the tree? What do we already talked a little bit about this. What do we want it? Wires, power lines. You see trees that are planted underneath the power lines. They grow under the power lines, and then the people complain about the utility company having to cut them out of the wires. But they have to, because if they leave them grow into the wires, somebody could be killed by electrical contact, or if the tree fails, it'll take out the power, and then they'll be screaming at them that way. So they have to keep the lines clear. Below, how much root area is available? We take a big tree and we shoehorn it into a small space. You know, how would you like to be cramped in a small one-bedroom apartment for your whole life? You know, it would kind of be okay for a while, but then it would start to get on your nerves. Sideways, how big is the tree going to get? So this is out in California. This is a redwood, and you think about putting a redwood in your front yard. This tree's probably only maybe 35 years old. Okay.
Somebody actually planted that there?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was probably planted when the redwoods they grow amazingly fast, but look how that tree has just overpowered the landscape. Yeah, and you got this little spot. They're amazing. They truly are. They're really amazing trees. But this tree is probably only it takes two people to reach around it already. But it's really kind of overpowering the house, and it's just getting started. It's just a baby. It's just a baby. Wind exposure. You know, how much wind are you going to get, because that can cause problems. Hardiness considerations. Somebody was mentioning the fruit trees, plum or peaches, apricots. There's a good chance we're going to lose crop every once in a while because of late freezes. You'll get some, you'll lose some. You have to understand that there are hardiness considerations. Our winters have been pretty mild of late, so we're getting by with a few plants that if we get a normal Illinois winter, we might lose. Salt runoff. You see places where the arborvitaes next to the road are burned because of salt, and people are putting up burlap to protect them. Okay, it's the wrong plant in that place. Soil factors. Our soils are very alkaline here, so certain plant species don't do well. The texture, compacted. There's all these things to fit the right plant to the right place. And it requires some homework to do it right. It isn't just go, oh, that one's pretty, let's put it in here and it'll be fine. That's kind of a loaded gun that may go on. And here's that great example. You're up in Canada, you grab the nice little, dig up the little conifer with the kids, you bring it home, you plunk it there alongside, but it'll never live. Darned if the thing didn't. And it starts to grow, and the next thing you know, you've got this, and it's sitting right here off the house. It's growing into the house. Now it's bumping into the siding. It's scratching the siding. The bugs are crawling up and getting in the upstairs window. And you call up your friendly arborist and say, well, can't we just move it out here? Like we can just pop this tree out of the ground and plunk it down there. So once again, you have to remember, how big is this tree going to get? How wide is it going to get? And how many people are living in a house now where someone put a plant in the wrong spot, just kind of forgetting. We forget when they're little tiny guys because we forget how long that we are actually going to be around in some of these cases. How about this crab apple versus that crab apple? Why does this one look so nice and this one look so grungy? They're crab apples, all right? And people would say, we know there's this disease called apple scab that causes a lot of our crab apples to defoliate, so you must have sprayed this one, or sprayed this one and not sprayed that one. Well, that's not the case. This one is naturally genetically resistant to that disease. And so once again, I was telling the person, if you go with, like apple trees, you want to make sure you select an apple tree that is naturally resistant to the apple scab fungus so that you don't have to spray them. Now, you can spray them to protect them, but why subject yourself to that annoyance if there's a real easy place that you can buy a plant that just doesn't get the disease? That's using resistant cultivars, and sometimes we have them, sometimes we don't, but where we do, it makes sense to use them, and it's the best means of managing disease where we've got resistant cultivars available. And of course, there's 800, 900 different types of crab apples, so you've got all shapes and sizes as well as resistance. How about this tree? Is that a good bargain? You find that in the nursery to bring it in and plant it in your yard? It's amazing what people think is good. More is better. You know, and we've got that in our brain. So this one is obviously a lot better than a tree with just one nice central stem. This one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But this is a disaster waiting to happen, right? Because it's got very poor form. It's real easy. These branches are very weakly attached and will fall out of the tree. So bargain trees a lot of times are not bargains. They may be cheaper to purchase, but they're going to cost you in the long run because you're going to have an arborist come out here and try to fix that, and it's almost impossible to fix something like that. So be forewarned that trees with poor structure are not very good. And some nurseries propagate their plants to make them look really bushy, so it looks like you're getting a better deal when actually you're not getting a better deal. And in many cases, it's buyer beware. Picking a good, structurally sound plant, that's why we always recommend go to a high-quality nursery and talk to somebody where you know what the plants are so they can help you pick a good plant. Because if you don't, you may save a few dollars, but you could be bringing a lot of headaches into your landscape. And once again, don't be penny wise and pound foolish. More is not necessarily better. How about planting trees? When's Arbor Day? When's Arbor Day? It's the last Friday in April, here in Illinois. Some states have it different, but it's the last Friday in April. So it's about 5 weeks away. Great time to plant trees. That's why they call it Arbor Day. This tree was just planted. You think it's right around Arbor Day? No. How can we tell? What time of year is it? Yeah, midsummer. Big tree. This tree is probably worth a couple $1,000s anyway, installed, and that's how the installers left it. They threw it in the ground, you know, and you take a $2,000 tree, put it in that situation, and think it's going to be fine. It's a lot of money to put up at planting something in the wrong time of year. That doesn't mean that you can't plant at that time of year, but you have to realize that your chances of failure go up. Okay? So we have to be careful with that. We only get one chance to plant a tree. And you want to do an excellent job at doing that because it's very important to get the plant off to a good start. How about the size of the tree that you plant? How many people think bigger is better? Yeah. Well, it's typically not if you can avoid it. Here, this is Gary Watson at the Borton Arboretum. These are 2 pine trees. This one planted when it was that size. This one planted was that size. But look, after 5 years, this one is just as large as this one is after 6 years. The larger trees tend to sit and sulk more, typically because a smaller tree, you're able to bring more of its root system with it when you plant the tree. So the larger the tree you plant, sure, you get a bigger tree, but that smaller tree will catch up to the larger tree over a period of years. I always recommend that you plant the smallest size tree that you can deal with or work with, be happy with, because that smaller size tree will get established and grow up faster and oftentimes catch up to a larger size tree. Sometimes we don't have that option. The older we get, we don't necessarily have as much time to wait around for a small tree to grow up. Sometimes we need a larger tree to fit into the landscape, but our risks with larger trees go up. And there are some problems with smaller trees too, but as a rule, I like smaller trees. They'll get established, they'll get started, they'll catch up to the larger trees. The thing that we lose is that instant size. And looking at those looking at those small trees. So smaller trees will establish in less time. Growth can catch up to the larger trees, and they are less susceptible to certain insects and diseases like borers and cankers during that time where they're establishing. That's kind of a weak point for the tree. So smaller has a lot going for it if you can get over that idea. There's more that a big tree will cost you more, but it costs you more in risk as well as just dollar. How many people would plant an oak tree? You think you plant? Great. What's one of the reasons do you think a lot of people don't want to plant oak trees? Slow growing. You always hear that. I don't want an oak because they grow too slow. Well, this is a bur oak, and this tree, this is 1 year of growth right here. And I'm about 6 feet tall, and you can see that's pretty even to me. So that tree that's about probably 3.5 feet of growth in 1 year out of a bur oak tree. So planted properly, mulched properly, a lot of trees, you get them started, young tree, off they go. And they can really start putting on some size in a short period of time. So don't necessarily fall prey to a lot of these old spouse's tails, all right, that I see out there. If you treat a tree properly, even a quote-unquote kind of slower growing tree can do a pretty good job if you do your part to care for it properly. A lot of that comes down to installing it properly, and I'm always worried about where they've got to use pickaxes to dig the hole. When you got pickaxes to dig the hole, that's probably one case that something isn't quite right here, that the ground is that hard, that solid, that poorly drained. Throwing that plant in there, okay, so once again, planting hole width, much more important than depth. You want that plant setting on a firm bottom so the ball doesn't set. So this kind of goes back and flies in the face of a lot of the traditional planting methods that we want a deep hole and nice soft stuff in the bottom. Roots go out, not down. So we want a wide, flat planting hole, usually at least twice as wide as the ball. 3 times is better. 3 times is better. Wider, not deep. If you dig the hole and come back and it rains and the water sets in the hole like that for 3 days, think that's a good idea? What's going to happen? That root system is just going to rot in that case. So once again, what's our drainage like? If we're going to have a place like this, there are only certain species of trees that are really going to tolerate that for any length of time. And in these holes, they were planting these trees. That's a person right there. And so those are the trees that they were planting. So I was backpedaling big time with these trees that, you've got a lot of bad things going. Large trees, this is out in New York. And they put about 4 of these in. 1 of them died. 3 of them are still coming along, but it's been 5 or 6 years. So, and they're struggling. So tough. But we warned the client that this isn't the best scenario. So sometimes you got pretty big trees to be transplanting. So that idea of how we plant a tree 2 to 3 times as wide as the ball, firm bottom. See, it's setting there so that ball doesn't settle or sink down in the ground. The first order roots, which means the roots in the tree are at the soil surface, which is a problem that we'll talk about here in a second. Orient the trunk so it was the same way in the nursery. If you can go out and pick a tree and you know how it was growing, a lot of nurseries do that. They mark which side was north, so we put the orientation in the same way when it's moved into the landscape. From the top of the root ball, fold the burlap down. Don't leave it exposed. Remove any baskets, wire basket rungs, and remove any twine from around the top of the root ball. Backfill with the original soil. Don't really amend it a whole lot. You'll see that. Make the soil better. The idea is if you make a wide hole and refill it with the soil that's there, the roots can move out. If you small hole, rapidly amended root system, or the soil, the roots will like that so much that they won't tend to move out of it, and you'll get a root ball that's all wound around the base of the plant like we'll see in a second. Stake only if it's necessary. Staking can cause problems if it's not removed. You want the trees to be able to flex and move a little bit. A lot of trees are overstaked, so unless you have to with large trees, you may have to keep them from falling over. But if you've got a tree and it wants to fall over, it may mean that the root ball isn't big enough. Small root ball. And of course, shipping plants, they're heavy, so smaller root balls mean less weight, sell for less, but that's a key to bringing the roots along with the tree. So you want big root balls, not small root balls. Kind of fold it down, like it's done here. Fold it down, okay? Because most of your root development is going to be out here. I'll show you pictures of what happens if you don't. Mulch the surface to the drip line and prune only to remove dead or broken branches at planting. You know, we can come back and prune later, but it's important to get as many leaves on the tree as possible because that's making the food for the plant to recover from the transplant damage. A lot of stuff. You just think you throw it in the hole, right? Take care of itself. Not really. So when I look at trees like this in the summer, real thin, spindly, what am I thinking the problems are? Almost always, where are they? People are looking for insects, they're looking for disease. What's the problem? It's all down here. Out of sight, out of mind. Can't see it, but looking at the plants too deep in the ground, really poor structured root systems, a lot of problems from improper installation. And this is what we're seeing, the planting stock quality. A lot of our trees are coming from the nurseries now with the roots too deep in the ball. If I unfold this plant and look at it, this is the root system that was in this plant. And you can see what's there. And where do you think, you can see where the original soil line was? Right here? Right up there? So where's your root system? It's clear down here in the bottom of the root ball. And you're bringing all this soil and there's nothing there. It's just soil. So a lot of our trees are coming, and if they're planted with the specs that would say plant this tree with the top of the root ball, even with the soil, we're still getting our root system stuck clear down in the ground. And there's a lot of industry professionals looking at this problem and trying to figure out ways to fix it. But it goes back, involves a lot of different people from how trees. Remember, our trees are mass-produced. They're just mass-produced like wrenches or anything else. These trees are not natural trees. From how they're propagated by the literal millions, they're mass-produced and they're anything but growing in a natural means. I would like to talk about it, but we just don't have time to get in there. The important thing is to realize that you want to know where these roots are at, and you want to get them up close to the top of the soil, at least within 3 inches of the soil surface. And it's not uncommon to see trees like this that are 8, 10, 12 inches down in the ground before you even get to any roots. And that creates a lot of problems. Same thing with container plants. Trees in containers, we're seeing more container plants. Nice soils, very messy root systems that form in them, and it creates problems. We see a lot of plants with root systems that form like this. And of course, as that tree gets bigger and those roots get bigger, what's going to happen under there? Problems, right?
Is it too late to trim them with that type of root later on?
It isn't too bad. You can actually do this if you, but the trouble is nobody checks. So you have to know to look for this and then to try and see it, and sometimes even small roots wrapped around, and you ever planted a tree and you take those roots and you're afraid to cut them, so you curl them around in the hole. You know, not a good idea, because all you're doing is getting them to form that racetrack and start going around that tree. I'll show you some pictures of what happens there. You're better off cutting them off, or better yet, make the hole big enough so you can spread those roots out a little bit better. But you're making a lot of work for me to make that hole that big. I don't want to dig the darn hole anyway, you know, and sit there. Now you're telling me I've got to dig it. But at least it's wider, not deeper.
So for that other scenario though, where the root system is way down here, and you want to get it up here, what are you going to do? You're going to end up, there's going to be like no structure, but it's going to like tip over. You're going to have to be, if you want those roots to be 3 inches below
Yep.
the soil, you're going to end up staking up the tree.
You're going to have to stake it up, and that's a lot of cases. You know, I said don't stake unless you have to, but to fix this, a lot of times you do have to stake the tree. But, or, you know, really look, and we're getting to the point where we would reject trees like this that are coming. We've got to go back to the nurseries and say, propagate your plants properly, don't sell us this, because we don't want it, we're not going to pay for it. That's what's really going to drive fixing this particular issue. But once again, it involves a lot of people, and a lot of these trees are produced out in Oregon, initially as small trees, and they're shipped in here to grow, and the mechanical processes are creating a lot of this issue. But there are people working on it, ways to make it a little bit better. When we do what I just described, you can see the soil line was up to this particular tree here. But when we planted it, we removed all that soil, and it may make the trees look funny. A lot of the reason that they're planted up here is to hide this crook that a lot of trees have. And this is the graft union where the rootstock was put onto the top part, and it leaves a little bit of a crook there, and people don't want to see that, so they cover it up. But this is actually, tree is planted properly. It's been mulched. It's up here to the surface, but it looks funny. But this will go away. I tried to get a picture of this same tree. It was planted about 3 years ago, and now it's much larger. You don't notice that crook so much after even 3 years of how well it's grown. So this is the opposite scenario. Real narrow hole, our tree thrown down in the ground, very poor staking, girdling, broken branches left. The burlap wasn't folded back. The twines were left wrapped around the trunk. And you think, gee whiz, it's just a tree, but how many chances do you get to plant the tree? One. So if we louse it up, we're really kind of condemning that plant to a struggle for the rest of its life to try and overcome that. So we can set it up to give the tree the best shot possible, or we can just throw it in the ground and think it'll be better and wonder why it isn't. Because going out and diagnosing trees, I see it over and over again. Trees too deep, trees where the girdling, where the supports were not taken off, trees where the tie downs were left. Here they put the tie downs on so tight that they actually stripped the bark down on the tree. You can see it just stripped the bark down. They cranked it down, and all the guy wires need to do is just keep the tree from tipping over. It's not to hold it down like it's going to get up and run away in the middle of the night. Of course, it's not going to do that. You know, those twine that are left on, a lot of cheap plants come with nylon twine that never breaks down, so the trees grow and struggle. Trees too deep, when you see branches coming out of the ground, not a good idea, right? And we'll see this all over. It's a sure sign that the trees are too deep in the ground when you've got branches, or they've been filled around. Here's some of that burlap that was left on top. You can see the bad root systems and how they, and this is just, you know, this is just rampant out there in the landscape.
Can you do anything with that lower back?
It depends. We use pneumatic air tools, which is an air-driven, don't think of like a flashlight to a laser. Like this laser shoots out a very tiny beam of light as opposed to a flashlight. And we use this real strong blast of air to expose these root systems. And for example, here's a situation where you're looking at that tree and it's like everything looks fine, right? Everything looks fine. But when we use the air knife to dig, this is what was under the ground. And who would suspect that? These burlap twines wrapped around that. You can see these roots that have come back up because the tree is way too deep in the ground. And what are these roots going to do as this trunk gets bigger? Can you see how this tree is going to very quickly end up looking like this tree? And of course, at this size, we can't fix that anymore. All right? But you don't suspect something is going on under the ground here because you don't notice it. But yet all this mess is underneath there. Well, that tool can expose this without damaging a lot of these roots, so then we can get in and clean this area up, get all that stuff off of here, do some pruning, and see here's our root system. And you see the root system beginning to form right down here. So we can get that back up we'll have a little bit of depression here, and we loosen this out, but it certainly, this plant was doomed. Back up. It wasn't going to make it. Even though it looks fine, it was never going to reach maturity. No way. No way. And about the time it would get up to the size where it's becoming a nice tree is the time it would start going downhill. So that's why doing these processes are very important, but you have to get to it early, because once they start getting 8 to 10 inches, a lot of times the damage can be so severe that we can't fix it anymore. Okay? So important. But a lot of people don't know about this, and they just think we're trying to make stuff up to sell things to you. If we talk about, we really should take a look, because the only way you know it's there is to go in and look for it. What about fertilizers, biostimulants, mycorrhizal spores, tonics, hormones, growth regulators, sure solutions? All this stuff that people bombard us to put on our trees to fix it all. What do you think? Good? Bad? Indifferent? None of these materials can make up for or correct errors in what we've talked about so far. So how do we bring the forest back to the trees? I recommend mulching all the time, as long as it's done properly. And this is how I talk about mulching a tree. This is a champion swamp white oak up in the village of Lake Forest. And that's bringing the woods back to the trees, right? When we look at removing the turf competition and bringing this wood chip mulch in, or an organic type of mulch, getting rid of the turf, this turns this whole area into a woodland-like system, and all the benefits that the tree picks up from having that occur. And one of the things that we find is the amount of tree roots in turf compared to the amount of tree roots underneath mulch. There's a lot of reasons why this occurs. A lot of it comes back to the elimination of the grass competition that creates kind of an unfavorable environment for roots to grow. But if you come to when I talk to a lot of our clients and we want them to do this, what do you think they tell us? No way, right? Because we've got this grass thing, okay? We've got this grass thing, and that's how we judge our properties, is by what our grass looks like, not really with what our trees look like. So, but the idea is you can create a more favorable environment for trees by mulching properly. I always tell people, stand on a given piece of real estate and look around and say, what plant materials are most important to me? And then try to manage those plant materials based on those beliefs. If the trees are the most important, then you should manage your landscape for the trees. If the grass is most important, then manage the grass. If the flowers, manage the flowers. But if the trees are most important, you need to know what is important to help them and how to do it properly. And mulching large areas is great where you can do it. Even an individual smaller tree, not quite so extensive. A lot of people say they don't like the way it looks, but I think it looks, pretty nice. Okay, I'll even take a little area like that. Why do you think this is even a good idea? Is that going to make a big difference to the real root area of that particular tree compared to this? What do you think? Probably not. But what is it going to do? Keeps the lawnmower away. And remember, trees aren't like people. Where we heal, trees seal. They can't replace damaged tissue. All they can do is seal it off and form around it. So when you damage a tree, that tree has to deal with that injury for the rest of its life in one way or another. And so those lawnmowers banging into the tree when the tree is very young, the tree is going to have to deal with that. And that's where a lot of our high hazard trees come from at a later date, because this can begin to decay, and if the tree can't get a handle on it, it ends up becoming more extensive, and when this tree is large, that can be the kind of the problem that can cause them to fail at a later date. But then people say, well, I don't use lawnmowers, I use string trimmers. But of course the string trimmer can be just as bad, if not worse in many cases. And any of you that have run a string trimmer know that you just get close to the tree and it just seems to be this magnetic force that just grabs it right into the tree and ends up barking it in just a very short period of time. So even that small mulch ring will help reduce those problems. What if we can't mulch? What if that we want to mulch, but our clients say no? Well, in the old days, there wasn't a whole lot that we could do. It was just, well, we can fertilize them and what else? But I've learned that fertilizer is not the answer to everything. It's about trying to make the soil better by managing the biology. And this is kind of new stuff. Well, it isn't really new, but we've kind of forgot about it. Now we're kind of coming back and saying, gee whiz, that sounds like a good idea. We can really try to bring that woods back to the tree, but without bringing the wood chips along with it. And that sounds kind of funny, but it's what we're forced to do in some cases. So we're trying to kind of fool the plant to think that it's growing in the woods when it's really not. Well, how do we do that? We bring in the organisms that could be found out in the woods and try and put them here in our urban situation. And we do that by using aerobic compost teas. Anybody heard about compost teas? All right, and what is a compost tea? Compost tea is simply we use a brewer, which is really just a big incubator. It's very well aerated, sends up a lot of oxygen in here. It's heated. You have a small bag of compost that you know what's in it. It's been tested. It's disease-free. It's got the organisms in that we would find out in a native woodland. And you put this compost in this brewer, fill it up with water, add a nutrient solution to the water, and you turn this thing on, aerated environment, warm, liquid. What do you think those organisms do in there? They multiply. That's right, they multiply. And in doing so, what you make is this solution that is basically just a mass of those organisms that you found in the compost. You just took it out of the compost, put it in this nice, warm, highly oxygenated solution, and they grow. They multiply. They reproduce. And then we take this liquid out and we combine it with other materials, and then we apply it out. We drench the soil or inject it into the ground underneath the trees. So basically what we're trying to do is take that biology out of the compost, multiply it, and then apply it in this situation where the grass and everything else may be conspiring to limit that development. Now this doesn't work as well as what a good mulching program can do, but it's kind of a way we may be able to have our cake and eat it too, in a way. Unfortunately, what do you think happens if we stop doing these applications? What do you think will happen? It'll just kind of go back, right, to what was before. So that's the downside of it. You put the materials down and you're trying to encourage them to grow, but you have to keep working with the soil in this way. Pruning, if you don't think pruning is a plant health care tactic, we're very fortunate here that we don't see this too often. What do we call this? What do we call that? Topping, okay, hat racking, stag heading. In a lot of cases, you go south out of Chicago down to central Illinois and southern Illinois, you'll see this, rampant. Very poor tree care, and these are willow oaks out in the Washington, D.C. area, and you could flat out kill certain types of trees by doing this to them. Willows, maples, a lot of times will resprout, but we'll see a lot of decay up here and problems, years down the road. So making proper pruning cuts and caring for trees properly is very, very important. If you're looking for an arborist, you want to make sure you hire a certified arborist, somebody that has demonstrated a basic knowledge of the right and wrong ways to care for trees so that you're making good, nice pruning cuts. This is a proper pruning cut. That's not a stub. That's an excellent pruning cut. Can't get much better than that. We have to be on our look for risk. We've talked a little bit about it. I know we were mentioning that you may have to have a tree, come down. Unfortunately, trees can pose a threat to people. And as arborists, we're constantly looking for decay in trees. This branch failed in a storm, but what if you had 3 kids jumping on that swing and that limb tore out of the tree with 3 kids on it? With how much weight is there? Real sad thing to be thinking about. And unfortunately, it's this problem that trees can do. They do fail, break things, and in some cases cause fatalities. And so we always have to be looking at trees as a potential threat. And unfortunately, you just can't fix things sometimes. And sometimes you can remove a problem branch. Sometimes the whole tree has to go. Those are very unpopular conditions, but I've seen a lot of people not use very good common sense and want to save a tree that is just a disaster waiting to happen. And we have to be realistic sometimes. Using the good guys, we've already talked about those lady beetles. This is not the Asian multicolored lady beetle, but this is an introduced lady beetle into North America, and you can see the aphids on this leaf, and that lady beetle has just cleaned off that spot. A lot more to go. Okay, but the Asian multicolored lady beetle has had a real impact. It was brought in to control peach aphids in nut plantations down in Georgia, and it spread out, and a lot of people cuss the darn things because they can bite and you pick them up and they smell, but our aphid problems have really gone down because of that lady beetle. And there's some other bad things, displacing some of the native lady beetles, so everything has its pluses and downs, but there's a lot of control that nature is doing and we're not really aware it's going on. And we can help nature by planting lots of flowers on our property, because a lot of the insects that feed on nasty bugs also need pollen and nectar and things to feed on too. So it's always recommended that you plant a lot of flower gardens. I've got, I put in a 700 square foot butterfly garden last year, and it's just got tons of these insects, and people look at them as bad, but they're not bad. So nature will help us if we allow it, and a lot of it is just to watch our pesticide handling so that we work properly. Sometimes we do have to spray. It's just like sometimes we don't like to go to doctors and get pills, but sometimes we have to. Sometimes we have to undergo surgical procedures because we have to. And that doesn't mean that all chemicals are evil in and of themselves. Some people object to them, but they can be used safely and properly. And a lot of the new generation of materials are much, much safer compared to the old materials. They're all made with an environmental key, usually soil biology, that can break them down and render them much safer than the original material are. We have things like insecticidal soaps and horticultural oils that are very low impact environmentally and are very effective against certain types of insects, certain types of diseases, but not all of them. A lot of the new materials are becoming available where we don't have to spray anymore, and we can inject trees utilizing different techniques to put materials either in the ground right next to the tree so the tree takes it up, or actually put it into the tree itself. These type of techniques sometimes have problems associated with them too. Trees aren't like people. They don't have the same type of vascular system. You can't treat every pest using these techniques, but some you can, and they can be very, very effective without spraying, and much easier to use. So there's many different choices and options out there. Sometimes spraying is our only option, sometimes it's not. And a lot of times we can just treat certain plants. The days of coming in and doing cover sprays where we mix up a cocktail of 3 different things, spray everything in sight 5 times a year, those days are really gone. Although there are still companies out there that do that, and that's just bad. There's no reason for that anymore, and you want to steer clear of companies that will say it's the best way of doing things, because it's not. When we come down and think about plant health care and all the things, how many things have I talked about tonight? Is your head bouncing around with all this stuff? How do I ever keep all this stuff straight? But that's one thing about plant health care. It is a philosophy that we can manage pests and make our landscapes better by utilizing these techniques. It's like you have to believe it yourself. I do believe it. We practice it every day. So it is possible to do this. It isn't just something that we're making up to sell somebody something. It is an educational process. Do you feel you have a few more questions? You know a little bit more tonight than when you came in? Maybe some questions to ask your landscaper, maybe some things that you may have been unaware of. That's important because this is all about learning. The whole point is knowledge is power. As an educated consumer, you're less likely to be taken advantage of by somebody that's trying to sell you something that you don't need. And it's a decision-making process. Which method is the best? Which method is most effective? Which method is going to cost the least? Well, there's always options. Very seldom is it black and white. Usually it's very many shades of gray. And what is the best scenario for person A may be totally inappropriate for person B. But what you want is somebody that can give you the options so that you can make the decision that works best for you. It's like your mechanic. Do I replace the car? Do I buy a new alternator? Do I buy a reconditioned alternator? Or do I just cross my fingers and hope for the best? Well, you don't want somebody that's trying to sell you a brand new one when a reconditioned one may work, but you want them to give you your options. And they may not be able to tell you which is the best, but you have that knowledge gives you the ability to try and make the best decision. And that's what you should ask of your arborist, your landscaper, anybody else. Be very, very careful about somebody that comes in and tells you what you have to do. All right, because you don't have to do anything except kick that person off your property. It's your decision, it's your money, it's your plants. People ask us all the time what we would do, but what I would do and what you would do can be two different things. We have kind of a funny outlook looking at plant materials because we work with them all the time. And you know what we can say, well, a box elder isn't a very nice tree, but if it's the only tree you've got, it may be very important to you. And we have to be very careful not to make those decisions that we would make and think that everybody thinks like us. So with that, I'll close this presentation.